Okay,
Great.
let's do this. Okay, so I'm just going to kickstart with a little bit of an introduction, and then I'll spend the first 35 minutes going through some of the questions with you that I have, and we'll spend the last 25, ish minutes doing a live demo of how a coaching session would look like. I am so
Mhm.
excited. I spent so much time thinking about, what is an issue that I'm going through that I would honestly already would want to bring to you. So first and foremost, thank you so much, Joyce, for agreeing to do this with me and being so generous with your time, your expertise, and having such a big heart to do this for my community as well. I really believe in coaching because it has really helped me in the different areas of my life. It gave me so much perspective, and I always find that after my sessions with you, I walk away feeling a lot more encouraged and I feel lighter. Not so much because, immediately all my problems are solved, but really because I feel like I'm able to see myself a lot more clearly. And then I'm able to work through whatever that I'm going through in my life and in myself, mentally, emotionally as well. So I am so excited to be able to share more about coaching, what it's really about. I
Mhm.
would say, especially in Asia, right? Coaching is something that I personally hear a lot more about in the Western world. And it's also actually how I discovered coaching. It's because of the books that I read. I've heard so many different kind of leaders and thought leaders in the Western world talk a lot about this and how it has really enriched their lives. So today we're going to talk about coaching. So first and foremost, Joyce, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me here. I just feel a ton of joy getting to have this conversation with you. So, I am a coach at the Conscious Leadership Group. We are context coaches, and I can explain a little bit about what that means. But essentially, I wasn't always a coach. I worked in marketing and advertising for 20 years before I became a coach, and I was a producer. I became an executive producer, and eventually I became a leader, a head of production, where I was managing a large team at Meta. I was managing a team across 4 regions. It was a big team. The team was faced with a lot of adversity and pressure just because of the business world. And I think I was always curious about the psychology of people's happiness, probably for as long as I can remember, even back to college. And I remember when I entered this creative field, I saw a lot of people who were really unhappy in their careers, even though they got to show up every day and do creative things. And it seemed like their jobs would be great, but there was a lot of suffering. And so I had long read leadership books. And when I read the book, The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, which was written by Jim Dethmer and Diana Chapman, who founded the Conscious Leadership Group, it was a big aha moment for me as a leader. I started to see a set of tools and principles and frameworks that would empower reports to take responsibility for their own happiness and their own sense of career fulfillment. And so I started to teach out of this book to my reports, and then it became a class at Meta. And I ended up training over 200 leaders through an 18-hour program that I designed there as part of just like a side hustle as part of my job.
Wow.
And eventually the requests came in, and there were so many requests and for training and for coaching that I was not really able to manage it with my full-time job, and the scales tipped. And in March of 2022, I made the leap to doing it full-time. So even though I had been doing a lot of it, I officially left the world of marketing and advertising to come into this space full-time. And I haven't looked back since. It's been incredibly fulfilling.
Wow. I have to ask you, Joyce, what brings you the most joy and fulfillment in what you do as a coach?
I think there are so many parts of it. It's a very multifaceted experience, but I think I love getting to witness people. I love to hold space for people to self-reflect and for them to come into their fullest potential. So when I get to help reflect back to them what it is that I see over here, when I get to hold space for all the okay and everything to be okay, the good, the bad, the right, the wrong, whatever labels they have on life, that they can bring it all to coaching, and that it's a safe space,
Mhm.
a judgment-free zone where they just get to reflect and explore what this is all here for to teach them, and then to use those learnings to have a more alive, fulfilled, on purpose experience of life. I find that to be like the most fulfilling thing.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I also wanted to ask, there's a lot of questions around, the different forms of personal development. There is therapy, there is counseling. So what is coaching in your words, and how does it differ from, say, therapy or counseling?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll answer it at a high level, and then I'll dive into the different kinds of coaching because there are a lot of different types of coaches. So I think like the simplest way I could describe a coach and what a coach does is a coach provides space and structure for reflection that's necessary for learning and growth. So coaching, hopefully coaching, increases your self-awareness in order to help you understand your responsibilities so that you can unlock your personal and professional potential. So this is different than modalities like therapy, because therapists do something very specific, which is licensed therapists are trained to treat and diagnose mental illness. And so I think that's the biggest difference between a coach and a therapist. And then there are lots of different kinds of coaches. So the coaching market is quite saturated. And I think there are content coaches that help you become, they are subject matter experts at something. So they teach you a specific skill. So there are, when I was at Meta, there were speaking coaches, there were
Oh, there's like
media.
professional sports, right?
Exactly. So they're there to teach you a really specific skill set that they are a subject matter expert in. And so that's what I call a content coach. You're going for a specific reason to learn something. And then there are context coaches. And at Conscious Leadership, we are context coaches. And that means we help people understand their relationship with their content. So content, the way we describe it, is the who, what, where, when of life. It's the problems that you perceive to be out there. It's the job, it's the promotion, it's the team, it's the economy, all of the stuff that you're dealing with day to day as a leader. Context is our relationship with the content. So
Wow.
how are we being with the content that's in front of us? That's what we like to explore, because we believe at the Conscious Leadership Group that without shifting and looking at the context, the content tends to recycle. It just tends to repeat itself in different circumstances.
Wow, that's so powerful. And I actually never thought about it this way. And it's so true, right? Because it's like things can happen around us. And sometimes, a lot of it is not within our control, but it's how we perceive it and it's what we choose to, how we choose to respond to it that makes all the difference. I'm curious to also know, Joyce, for yourself, what is the role that coaching has played in your life?
Oh, so much. I mean, between reading the book, The 15 Commitments to Conscious Leadership, and then being coached by a conscious leadership coach, I would say that I came in for like some professional growth, and it effectively had me remap the way that I was living my life. I realized that the way that I was being with my content, whether it was my personal relationships, my relationship with my family, the way that I was showing up in the world, conscious leadership, or this form of coaching, this context coaching, was helping me to almost excavate and then examine the unconscious
Wow.
beliefs, behaviors, and actions that had been going on for my whole life that I wasn't really aware of. So by looking at the things that I was doing at an unconscious level and bringing that to my awareness, I started to have more intentionality around what I was creating and noticing how often I was putting myself at an unconscious level, of course. But I think for myself, I realized how much of my life I had been operating from a position of victim, that
Wow.
things were happening to me and I was powerless to do anything
Or
about it.
helpless too. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it pushed me to understand that I am the creator of my experience. I am the creator of my well-being. And if I'm able to understand that I'm operating from a victim mindset, we say we cannot change that which we're not aware of. So if you don't know you're operating from a victim mindset, it's very hard to step out of that. So first I had to know that and sit and really look at myself in the mirror and say, this is what you're up to. You keep subscribing to victim behavior, and it's not creating the results you want in your life. So how would you like to shift this? And from there, I started to step into my creator, and I began to design what I thought would be my most exquisite life. And that's part of how I became a coach.
And how long did that process take? Because I think one thing that people perhaps, and I would love to ask you, one thing that in my opinion, people misunderstand is that, oh, it's kind of like, you go and see a coach for a couple of times and after that you'll be completely healed. There'll be no more problems. So yeah, how long did that process take for you?
I think it looks different for everyone. So I can only speak to my own experience. I'm not sure what other people's experience is, but for me, it took around 4 or 5 years to really get a handle on this material, to
Yeah.
do the work. Awareness is step one, and then adherence is really important. So how often are you noticing that you step into that victim mindset in my case? And how often am I willing to step out of it every time I notice that it's here? And so part of the work that you and I have done is
Yeah.
like this essential framework inside of conscious leadership, which if anybody listens to this podcast, I hope it's like the one thing that they take away. And that is this framework of above the line and below the line. And it's a binary model around that describes our relationship with our content, with what's out there. And so above the line, we react to the world and people and circumstances from a place of trust, curiosity, and seeing life as a game of learning. And from below the line, we react to life and people and circumstances from a place of resistance and threat. So being in opposition to what is and being closed down and defensive about it. And I actually think as I describe that framework, being able to know where you are, being able to locate yourself at any point in time is bringing that awareness to the forefront of, I guess, your consciousness to know, okay, around this birthday party that I'm throwing, am I above the line or below the line? And how do I know? Because what we know is you can react to anything from above or below the line
Yeah.
and create radically different outcomes. So from
Wow.
above the line, a birthday party can feel like a deep internal sense of well-being and joy. And from below the line, it could feel like resentment, frustration. There could be tears. You could feel like you never want to do it again. And so I think it's really so important to know from where you're operating or from where you're acting, because whether you're above or below the line, you're going to create a very different outcome. We also know that from below the line, there's a much lower probability of like the best possible outcome. Because when we're below the line, we're in a state of constriction. We're perceiving that there's a threat out there that's happening to us. And that's completely natural and normal, by the way. It's just a human experience. All humans are hardwired to perceive threat that's happening out there. We are hardwired that way so that we could survive. So back in the caveman days, we would look for threat. And if there was any threat to our approval, control, or security, we would sense it and we would constrict to protect ourselves and stay safe. In modern day business or life, our ego has a really hard time telling the difference between when we're actually in danger and our safety and security are at risk versus just everyday threats to approval, control, and security. So when our ego senses there's a threat, we'll just constrict, drop below the line. And it's a totally natural and normal human behavior. But it creates we have less access to this problem-solving area of our brain when we're below the line and in that state of constricted threat. So if you imagine like your house is on fire and your family is inside of it, but somebody's asking you to solve a work problem, you wouldn't be fully available or present to solve that problem because you're in a state of constriction. And so I think that's what I like to point to as an example around how reacting to the world from below the line can create a less great outcome than if you're above the line.
Yeah, and like you said earlier, I think it's sometimes natural for us to react and come from a place of below the line. And I find that, especially through my sessions with you, I have slowly learned to rewire my brain to also, be more conscious or catch myself at least, questioning myself when I encounter something challenging or an issue, to question myself like the way you would, usually gently nudge me and question me when I share an issue with you. So that has also been very helpful for me. And that's why I believe that coaching is not just a one-off process. It is something that is ongoing. And there's a lot of internal work that the individual also has to do after that. I'm curious to understand from your point of view, Joyce, what is one thing that you think most people misunderstand about coaching?
I think that people sometimes come to coaching and think that the coach is going to tell them the answer. So people will bring a problem to the coach and say, what should I do? This is the state of the company, or there's a drama happening with these people. What should I do? And I think that maybe there are some coaches out there that will tell you what to do. But in the world of context coaching, we're less interested in telling you what the answer is and more interested in helping you peel away the noise or get rid of the noise that's around you so that you can hear more clearly your own intelligence, your own knowing. And there's, I think that sounds much easier said than done, because there are a lot of structures that we build up around ourselves that prevent us from being able to access our inner knowing. And so I think one of the most rewarding parts of being a context coach is helping people understand their relationship with their problem around the reorg, around the state of the economy. Are you above the line or below the line? And how do you know? And then doing some exercises and frameworks to help them to understand, how are they being with this problem? How is that a familiar pattern that may have showed up in other places in their life? What are some defense mechanisms or strategies that they're using that are actually creating a greater sense of disconnection from their own knowing and intelligence? And then through that work, helping them come to the answer for themselves. I find that to be the most powerful way to support clients in unlocking their potential. I also want to define conscious leadership because I realized we didn't do that. So the way that we define conscious leadership is conscious means being in the here and now in a non-triggered, non-reactive state. And leadership is those who are willing to take responsibility for their impact and influence over others. So at the Conscious Leadership Group, what we're here to do is really help people understand how much are they in a state of triggered reactivity and how might be leading to the results they're creating in their lives versus how much are they here now, not in what happened last year, not in the meeting that's happening after the coaching session, but how are they here now in the present moment when they're just in a state of conscious awareness in presence? And can they tell the difference between when they're in that state, which feels open and free of suffering versus when they start to constrict around how life shows up or how business shows up, and then teaching them tools and frameworks to be able to work through that.
Wow. And Joyce, what can someone expect in their first coaching session?
I think they can expect to feel seen and held. I often find that that is one of the things clients are most looking for, even if they don't realize it. Just someone who can be with them, who can reflect back to them what they're experiencing, who can hold the space for them to really reflect and examine what it is that they're feeling. So oftentimes I'm with clients and there will be tears and they'll say, I'm surprised, or things come up that they didn't imagine they were going to talk about. And it's just that act of like having space where somebody can see you and witness what you're experiencing. I think is something that anyone could expect. And then in the world of CLG or Conscious Leadership Group, to be able to learn some really helpful contextual frameworks that you can use yourself to empower you to solve your own state of suffering, your own anxiety, and your own problems.
And going back a little bit to, the first part of your answer where you shared being seen and being held, why do you think that is so transformational to us?
Because I think all human beings want to feel connected. I believe that we all put on, starting from childhood, we all start to build survival strategies, and we start to go to sleep to certain parts of ourself that exist in order to navigate life as children and then as adults.
Or
And
to numb
so
certain parts of our lives. Or to numb certain parts of our life, we have coping, or at least I realize that there are different kinds of coping mechanisms that I have, built in my life over the years, just to avoid perhaps, certain areas in my life that I need to work through.
yeah, so I think a lot of our coping mechanisms that usually begin in early childhood are to help us avoid feelings we don't want to be with, things that feel scary, fears that come up. And so we get really good at these strategies. And then as adults, they almost become superpowers. They help us be more successful. They help us achieve our goals. They become these over-exercised muscles. They start to take over the movie of our lives. And so I believe that all humans really deeply want connection. And when we allow these strategies or these personas or parts of self to take over our lives, we can start to feel really disconnected from who we are. And we start to feel disconnected with the people around us because more and more it begins to feel like an inauthentic way of being, where just one small part of us has become so enormous that it's directing the entire movie. And so I think inside of coaching, it's an opportunity to look at the other parts of ourselves that have been tucked away in the shadow or who haven't been given the opportunity to speak up, and just to explore and accept all the parts of ourselves and feel more connected to ourselves. And when we're seen and held by a coach, it can feel like medicine because there's that connection with the coach, and that coach is supporting you to be more connected to yourself.
Mm. And ideally, when should we, approach a coach for a session? Because I understand also, sometimes when I talk about coaching and, people will say, oh, but I'm okay, nothing's wrong with me, I'm not facing anything huge, I don't think I need a coach. But ideally, when should one go to a coach?
I mean, I trust that people have the intelligence to go to a coach when it feels right for them. And so it's a kind of medicine that you call in when you're ready for it. And I really believe that about each client that I meet, that they come to me at exactly the time that they feel ready for it. And so I just trust that there is no specific time or formula for when a coach is going to be supportive to you.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost that your willingness has to match a time in your life or a circumstance in your life where that support feels not just helpful, but like critical, needed.
Wow. I think that's a great answer, because really, I think when we are ready and willing, like you said, right, then we really go in with an open heart and mind and ready to receive. And I think that's where it becomes more powerful. Are there any common themes that you notice between your clients, especially in today's world?
Yeah. I mean, there are so many. I would say the first two that jump out are those who are in a state of they're living in less than their full aliveness. So there is something about the way they're experiencing their life and their career where it's almost like there's a voice that's telling them there's more for you here. And so oftentimes the clients that I work with are starting to hear that voice, where they know that they could feel more alive, more energized, more connected to purpose or a sense of source, something greater than them, and that they are seeking that out. I also work with a lot of clients who are in transition.
Mm.
And so a lot of the clients that come to me, and I make up, this is maybe because I just went through a big transition in the last 4 or 5 years. I came out of a divorce. I was working at Meta, dealing with all kinds of change, and then I changed career paths entirely. So I've just been through a giant transition. So I make up that I'm attracting people into my life that are going through transition, but it's people who are in between states, who are, not at this job or that job yet, are leaving this season of life and getting ready for the next season of life. And feeling confused and maybe a little overwhelmed by that in-between state where it's neither this or that. And I love working with those kinds of clients because there's so much goodness, so much magic that happens in what I call the liminal state, where this in-between time is like, it's almost a sacred time where you get to deconstruct things that aren't working for you, understand why they're not working for you, and then start to redesign and rebuild the life that you most want. Since we're all growing and evolving all the time, it's such a beautiful moment to pause and reflect, and then with intention and conscious awareness, design the life that you really want so that you can be in that full aliveness.
That's beautiful. And are there any challenges or issues that are unique to Asians, Joyce? And this is just something yeah, it's just, I'm so curious, especially for you. And I'm sure you get to meet a wide range of clients as well.
I would say that because I'm a context coach,
Yeah.
all of the frameworks that we use, above the line, below the line, the practice of holding opposites, there's lots of frameworks that we use. They're pretty universal. They're designed for like human beings, regardless of gender, culture, ethnicity. And so I think that the tools can work for everyone. And if somebody says to me, well, my issue is about being a woman in the workplace, then I would just say, what's your relationship with being a woman in the workplace? Let's look at that. Instead of looking at you believing you're not getting opportunity or promotions, let's look at how you're being with a woman inside of a male-dominated industry. So we'll use the frameworks to unpack where people are getting stuck around certain types of identification that they have that are making them feel other or separate. That's like a very long-winded way of saying that these tools work regardless of culture and ethnicity, but as an Asian person. So if you really knew me, you would know that I was born in Taiwan. I immigrated to the United States with my family, my mom, dad, and my two sisters in the early 80s. And I grew up very much in between two worlds, between the culture that my parents grew up with in Asia and the culture that I was learning as an American. And that's a specific cultural experience. From that perspective, I think what I see inside of coaching sometimes with specifically Asian immigrants, but also I think Asians more broadly, is this Eastern mentality of what the family thinks, what the culture thinks. There's a focus on approval and security in this way, where I find Western culture to be much more focused on the individual, and that Eastern culture is focused more on the collective and the group. And I think both are beautiful places to be and explore. Sometimes with myself and with other Asian clients that I work with, it's about finding what your values are, who you want to be, what your gifts are, what your purpose is outside of the values, the purpose, the identity of the larger group. And how can you be with both? It's not an either or. Can you hold those values and can you examine and stand for your own? And what's a beautiful way of integrating those two worlds?
That's amazing. And I love that. And I think that is something we can all relate to, especially, because in Asia, because of our culture, the way we were brought up so many times, like you say, I think we worry a lot about family pressure, what our parents would think, even our choice of our careers and, parenting, our decisions and things like that. So many of the times, so affected by the approval that we need and want from our parents because perhaps we felt like we didn't get that from them when we were younger. How do you measure, Joyce, the success of coaching for your clients and the progress for your clients?
When I was inside of Meta and I was training leaders in conscious leadership, I actually took a very data forward approach to trying to understand what something like bringing consciousness into leadership could do for an organization. So at that time, when I was experimenting, I partnered with data science and research, and we built surveys so we could understand, like, was there any correlation between people who had gone through 18 hours of conscious leadership training and metrics of an organization? And what we saw was like some increases. People who had been through this program had an increased sense of belonging, felt they could more transparently communicate with their manager and their reports. They felt that they could bring their authentic selves to work. So we started to see the health metrics of an organization rise as people were doing this self-awareness or this consciousness work. And that was really cool to see.
Wow.
As a one-on-one coach, I would say it's much more qualitative how I look at success. So if I get feedback from a client that they feel more free, that they feel more alive, and that they feel empowered to be the creator of their well-being, then that to me is like all the success that I'm looking for. Because I think in the world of conscious leadership, success is just, are we willing to learn from everything that shows up? And I think that's like the most fulfilling part, regardless of outcomes.
It's beautiful, and I can really attest to that as well. And it's so cool to know the results of the conscious leadership course that you did, and especially how it's impacted individuals. Because I really think that when an individual becomes better, becomes more alive, the people around him or her, be it the team, the family, the partners, everyone, and the friends, right? Everyone gets better because of that. So I also really feel the responsibility of taking care of myself and intelligently, mentally, emotionally, so that I can give to the people around me better.
Yeah, I was going to add something around,
Yeah,
there's work we do at the Conscious Leadership Group inside of Context Coaching that's about
yeah.
helping to identify your zone of genius. And that's when you're in your flow state. It's when you are doing something that you love to do, that you're really good at, and you're feeling really connected to a sense of source. And so a lot of the work we do inside of this space is helping people get more clear about that, and then taking responsibility for operating in their zone of genius and not operating in their zone of incompetence, competence, or even excellence. And so a lot of leaders that I work with are operating in their zone of excellence. And that is something they are really good at. They've been probably rewarded for, recognized, bonused. They've gotten a lot of accolades for doing this really well. And so they keep doing it because it feels safe and it feels good. But at a certain point, if they start to feel like a lack of fulfillment, and they're like, well, I wish I could be doing something more creative, or I wish I could be doing this or that, but I don't know how, or I feel stuck. That's something I hear a lot. We'll look at, oh, are you operating in your zone of excellence, and how do you know? And what does your zone of genius look like? And there are exercises that we do to help people get clear on that. And then we do a lot of contextual coaching around the fear that stands between excellence and genius, because this is some research that came from the Hendricks Institute, but they say that fear guards the line between excellence and genius, that it can be really scary to operate as our best selves, doing what we love to do the most, and then imagining a world in which we have all of the resources that we need to do that. I think a lot of people have a hard time believing that they deserve it, that they can live in that they can manifest that. There are a lot of like upper limiting beliefs, that might sound good on paper or in a book, but that's never going to happen for me. And it's too scary to imagine a world in which I step into my genius.
Joyce, that's
And
amazing.
I'm saying that from experience because I was one of those people.
Tell me more, like how do you unlock that zone of excellence to get to a zone of genius? Because a little bit of context, first and foremost, I really believe that all of us are gifted very uniquely. And I really believe in the intersection of these three circles, which I learned from Jim Collins. First and foremost is, what do we do that makes us truly come alive, that brings us most joy? What do we do that, can bring social and economic value to ourselves and the world? And lastly, what is it that we are genetically encoded to do in this world? It's not just something that we're good at, we're strong at, but truly what we're like a fish in water, right? Like what we are genetically encoded to do, something that we can do that's, better than the rest, something that, once we hone and work on, we see, exponential improvements. So that is something I think about a lot, which I think is, discovering our purpose and our calling in this world. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time here with zone of genius and zone of excellence, also because I think this is so interesting, and I would love for, you to one day see if you could do a short course on this for the community, because this is a question that a lot of us think about all the time, right? And it's good, and we should actually be questioning, is what I'm doing in my zone of excellence, or am I in my zone of genius?
So I love this question, and I'll just use my own personal story. So I worked in film production for 20 years, and I was told my whole career, you're good at this. I won awards for it. I got promoted for it. And so I think I derived a lot of sense of my own value and self-worth in this job and this set of skills. And I was good at it. So why on earth would I possibly want to leave that? And what really woke me up to this idea of excellence versus genius was first an inner voice that was showing up in me, that was looking around and saying, is there more? Could life be better than this?
Wow.
It's almost like what's missing? It's like an inner voice that shows up. And when it shows up, you just know. And so as I read the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership and was working with a coach, they describe these 4 zones. And I think it's important to define each of them. So first is your zone of incompetence. And that's what you're generally not great at. It doesn't mean you're an incompetent person. A lot of people have aversion to that term, but it doesn't mean you're an incompetent person, but there are certain things that fall into your zone of incompetence. For me, that is scheduling, or like calendar logistics is in my zone of incompetence. Some like technology things are in my zone of incompetence. So but just knowing almost everybody's better at this than me. And so just being able to name that. Then our zone of competence, we can do it, but it requires a lot of effort and we're just doing an okay job at it. And lots of other people can do it better than you. And so for me, that was probably operations. I can do operations for a team. I can operate if there's like a business plan and things that need to be done. Sure. It doesn't bring me a lot of joy and I do it okay. And it takes me a lot of energy to do it okay. Then we look at excellence. Excellence is something that you do better than most people. People reward, praise you for it. You have gifts in the space. Generally, you're good at it, but it doesn't leave you feeling very connected to yourself or some sense of greater fulfillment. You can do it, but it might feel like something's missing. And then we look at genius. So genius is when you're in your flow state. When you love what you're doing so much, you lose track of time while you're doing it. Oftentimes people who are in their genius will report, oh, I thought everybody was good at this, because it's so deep inside of them that they can't even notice that other people aren't as good at this as they are. It is when you have the least amount of effort you're putting out and the greatest impact. And it's when you just feel so deeply connected to yourself and so fulfilled and congruent to your sense of internal purpose. So a lot of people hear that definition and they're like, that doesn't sound like it's possible for me, or that feels scary, or I have no idea what that even looks like. And so a lot of this coaching can help you to uncover it, because genius is not something you need to go get. It already lives inside of you. You've had it for as long as you've been alive on this planet. And so what I point back to is bringing you back home to yourself, seeing your gifts, your unique fingerprint and legacy that you're going to leave on this world, coming home to that and standing in that as long as you operate from that place and you have a whole body yes to what you're doing, that you're always going to have enough. And you're going to be able to have this impact and influence on others that will, the ripples will go far beyond yourself.
Joyce, this is so powerful. And I think that is, what it truly means for us to step into our calling and purpose, and why we were even created in this world, in the first place. So thank you so much for that. Are there any last words or anything that you want to add for the audience today, especially for most of us, it's still something, coaching is still something we are learning about. Perhaps, for most of us, we are exploring about. So are there any last words that you have for us?
Yeah, I think one of the things that really woke me up as I explored this work was Byron Katie, who has something called The Work, and she has something called the turnaround method, but she's somebody that we pull some learnings from in conscious leadership. She says something which always really sticks with me, and that's that in life, pain is inevitable. In life, pain is inevitable. In life, pain is inevitable, but suffering is a choice. And so a lot of the work that we do,
beautiful.
Yeah, a lot of work we do inside of conscious leadership is understanding, the root of our own suffering, how much we let our reactivity control us, and how that creates a sense of not having freedom or not having aliveness, and that it doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to experience life in this way. It's not happening to us, that we can be the creators of our experience, and we can choose to let go of that reactivity and come back into presence.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Joyce. I just wrote that quote down because it's so powerful, right? And it's something that I myself, especially in the last year, have been reflecting a lot about. Like, while I cannot control what happens around me, I can control what happens within me and how I let it affect me. So thank you so much for sharing that.